Watch your step, Majesty.
I'm not looking forward to all the ceremony today.
Your signet ring. There. You're ready.
Thank you, Alexei. Open the doors.
Dishonored 2 is not the greatest game that I have ever played. Far from it, in fact. In many ways, this sequel is superior to its predecessor. Those at Arkane Studios clearly put everything they had into this project. They strove to craft a game even more inventive and groundbreaking than the first. And yet, Dishonored 2 failed to innovate in the same ways. It failed to capture the attention of the wider gaming public. What happened? A sequel is always burdened by expectations. Crafting a AAA game is a monumental task on its own. With a sequel, the challenge is twofold. Dishonored 2 had to not only meet fans' expectations, but surpass them. It had to be bold, fresh, and surprising, while still carrying on the series' legacy. Happily, I can say that Arkane Studios managed to pull off both in this sequel. Longtime fans and newcomers alike praised Dishonored 2, myself included. In fact, I would still count it among my favorite games of all time. Arkane devoted themselves to expanding on everything great about Dishonored. This game features longer, wider, and more intricate levels. The player can now choose between two protagonists, each with a wealth of new powers and tools. These include a wider range of options for non-lethal play. The narrative is wider in scope and more malleable to player choice. And yet, myriad smaller issues compound to undermine these improvements. So it is that this game fails to truly surpass its predecessor. This is not to say that Dishonored 2 is a bad game, or even a mediocre one. No, Dishonored 2 is an incredible game. And yet, Dishonored was as close to perfection as any game can get. The first game was smaller in scope, true, but this focus allowed Arkane to polish every one of its systems to a mirror shine. Dishonored 2, sadly, is not nearly so impeccable as that. In this video, I'll be closely examining Dishonored 2. The format will continue from my previous episode, so you should know by now what to expect. If you haven't seen my video on Dishonored, then I suggest watching it first. It lays the foundation for this series, and many of the arguments I will make in this episode. Furthermore, this video will contain total spoilers for Dishonored and Dishonored 2. I will give a second, proper spoiler warning before we go too in-depth. Once again, if you haven't played these games, please do so before watching. Dishonored 2 is well worth your time. If you loved the first, I can guarantee you will love the second, even for all its faults. Now, let's examine Dishonored 2, and the ways it does and does not live up to the promise of the first.
Feel better knowing you can take care of yourself. When trouble does finally come, you're ready to fight.
Following the release of Dishonored and its DLCs, Arkane moved on to two new projects. Harvey Smith moved to France to head up production of Dishonored 2 with Arkane Lyon. Rafael Colantonio, meanwhile, remained in Austin to lead production on Prey. This sequel would use an in-house engine based on id Tech 5, or 6 according to some sources. Arkane chose to craft a custom engine to accommodate larger levels and more robust enemy AI. The goal was to create denser and more credibly real city environments. They called it the Void Engine. Arkane used player feedback from the first game to guide the production of the second. Levels would be larger and more dense with content, with the goal of creating a much longer game. The game would be more challenging on higher difficulties. New enemy types were designed to force the player to adapt their playstyle. The player would have a wider range of tools to solve problems. In every way, the scope of Dishonored 2 was massive. The narrative, too, would be more intricate and meaningful. The chaos system was made more subtle and granular. Player choices in the narrative would result in dramatically different endings. Some missions, too, would completely change based on player choice. Harvey Smith had of course worked on both Deus Ex and Invisible War. He knew not to listen to the pressure to reinvent the wheel. Players wanted more of the same. They wanted more Dishonored. Harvey and Raph announced Dishonored 2 at E3 2015. They revealed that this time we would be playing as Empress Emily Kaldwin. The trailer showed a stunning mansion built of clockwork. Emily used familiar tricks like bend time and the arc mine, but she also used new powers like a tentacle lash and a shape-shifting ability. Harvey revealed that players would have the choice to play as either Corvo or Emily. He promised that the sequel would carry on the design values of the first. The hype was building, and would only grow further with the gameplay reveal at E3 2016. Harvey explained Arkane's devotion to world building and showed off the new city setting. He also revealed that each mission would feature a unique mechanical twist. One mission had periodic sandstorms, while another had the player traveling through time. It was clear to fans that Arkane meant what they had said a year before. Dishonored 2 would be bigger, bolder, and more inventive. Dishonored 2 received a flood of awards and accolades before its release. Reviews were positive yet again, though did not reach the 90+ scores that Dishonored had. The game launched on November 11th, 2016. Dishonored 2 failed to reach the sales expectations set by the first game. It sold 40% fewer copies than Dishonored. Players complained of poor performance, game-breaking bugs, and crashes on PC. Dishonored was an instant classic, but sadly, Dishonored 2 was not. Arkane clearly meant to do right by their players, and judging by reviews, they succeeded. With such ambition and clarity of vision, how did Arkane fail to captivate the wider gaming public? If you ask me, the reasons for this are deep and thickly layered. However, there is one core issue unrelated to the game's quality. Immersive sims are a niche genre. They always have been. Mankind Divided and Hitman 2016 both sold far fewer copies than their contemporaries. In fact, I think we should regard the original Dishonored as the exception to the rule. Immersive sims are not blockbuster releases. They are purpose-built for a devoted kind of player that loves this sort of game. For all their quality, they are simply not competing in the same realm as prestige AAA titles, nor should they. With that said, there is still much to critique in this sequel. Before we begin, I'd like to make it clear that I am going to criticize this game a lot. I do this not because I want to tear Arkane down, far from it. Rather, I want to show just how close to perfection they came. I love this game to pieces, and I want it to be better than it is. Before we get to all that though, let's set the scene. Where Dishonored opened with a boat ride, Dishonored 2 opens with a ceremony. We begin the game as the young Empress Emily Kaldwin on the anniversary of Jessamine's death. Corvo is right there alongside us, and for the first time, we hear him speak.
Emily,
You look tired, Father.
every year I think the anniversary of Jessamine's death will be easier, but it never is.
I wish.
Already, some of my troubles with this game begin to show themselves. Giving Corvo a voice in this game was a mistake. The voice acting does add definition and clarity to Corvo's personality. At the same time, it also undercuts Corvo as a player avatar. Where once we were able to define Corvo's personality for ourselves, it is now defined for us. Gone is the forgiving and kind-hearted Corvo I had envisioned. He is now a gruff and brooding man with a history of brutality and violence. The game does go even further in invalidating the player's choices from the first game, and we'll get to that soon. Duke Luca Abel soon interrupts the ceremony, and brings with him an uninvited guest. Somehow, Delilah has returned. She gives her villainous speech, and the guards turn against Emily. Then, with no input from the player, Corvo brutally murders several of the guards. Wait, what? This felt like a bit of a slap in the face to me. In Dishonored, my version of Corvo went to absurd lengths to avoid violence and murder. Now he's completely fine with slaughtering his coworkers? I understand that this game follows a particular ending and canon from Dishonored, but if the intention is to allow the player to define their character, at least let the choice to kill be theirs. As it stands, non-lethal players will find themselves disconnected from Corvo. Their narrative experience contradicts their gameplay experience. Yes, the dreaded L word rears its ugly head again. With all that said, the player can also choose to play the rest of the game as Emily Kaldwin, and for my money, she's the much better option. She provides a fresh start for the player, both mechanically and narratively. Corvo's time has come and gone. This is Emily's story, and I think it better to let her tell it. So, with the throne room in disarray, our heroes stand back to back, and we must choose our protagonist. Delilah turns the other character into a statue, and leaves them in the throne room as a dark reminder of her power. Yes, we've been dishonored yet again. Now we have to find a way to stop Delilah and free our frozen family member. After the coup, Sam Rockwell tells us to go to our room. Obviously, we are not going to listen. We sneak or fight our way through Dunwall Tower and take back our signet ring from Mortimer Ramsey. Whether he lives or dies is once again left up to the player. Myself, I chose to knock him out and lock him in Emily's safe room. We break out into Dunwall proper and make our way through the city streets to a ship called the Dreadful Whale. Its captain, Megan Foster, kindly offers to help us get out of the city. There's nothing left for Emily or Corvo in Dunwall, so we head to the source of it all. the Jewel of the South, ruled by the firm hand of Duke Luca Abel. The place where Delilah clawed her way back from the void. The city at the edge of the world. Karnaca. The outsider pulls us into the void, introducing himself to Emily, or greeting Corvo as an old friend. This time, we can refuse the outsider's mark, allowing for a full no-powers playthrough. It's a great addition, and allows for a greater player agency in defining their character. He also gives us the heart, which now houses the soul of Jessamine Caldwin. Shockingly, neither Corvo or Emily react with much emotion to this. I'm not sure if this is on the dialogue or direction, but neither character reacts with any interest. This should be an emotional scene, and yet it absolutely does not come across as such. I know that both voice actors are more than capable of carrying an emotional scene like this. It surprises me just how lifeless this is. We return from the void, and Megan briefs us on our first mission. A mutual friend, Anton Sokolov, knew about the conspiracy against Emily. An assassin called the Crown Killer had been framing Emily and Corvo for their murders. That same killer abducted Sokolov from the dreadful whale when he got too close to the truth. Megan suspects the Crown Killer is a patient from the Addermeyer Institute, so we must travel there and speak with the good Dr. Hypatia. Megan drops us off in the port of Karnaca and leaves us to find our own way in this new city. The first thing that will strike the player about Karnaca is how beautiful it is. Arkane pushed themselves to craft the most believable and cohesive cityscape possible. The years of precision craftsmanship the artists engaged in is clear. Every brick and pipe has been laid with careful thought. There are vast arching wooden structures blended seamlessly with brick and iron architecture. Rickety windmills dot the rooftops. Karnaca's palette is far more colorful than Dunwall's. Golden sunlight bathes the city in a perpetual saturated palette. Even the most dismal environment is far brighter than Dunwall. It genuinely does feel like we've traveled to the edge of the world. Aside from the art direction, the visual fidelity is incredibly high too. The textures are crisp and their subtle details pop when light strikes them in just the right way. The models have an impressive amount of detail yet maintain their readable silhouettes. It might seem that the art style has completely shifted, but this is only partly true. While the visuals have moved toward realism, they maintain their painterly quality. Textures still have oil painting brush strokes when closely examined. The colors are more saturated and lighting more dramatic than reality. The art gives the impression of realism while maintaining its unique style. Karnaca has a far denser civilian population than Dunwall too. The city feels alive with little stories playing out in every corner. The new weather effects and brilliant ambient audio greatly enhance the mood. The Rat Plague was a great excuse to save on performance by limiting the amount of characters on screen. This time, no such excuses are made. Once more, Arkane impresses with their immense attention to detail. However, this all comes at a sadly inexcusable cost. I am speaking, of course, of the game's disastrous PC performance at launch. Dishonored was well optimized and relatively bug-free at launch. Dishonored 2 had a notoriously rocky start. Players complained of choppy and unstable frame rates, crashes, and glitched bone charms. Thankfully, Arkane would later release major patches to fix the most glaring issues. However, at least for me, there are still major issues with this game's performance. See, I play on a 165Hz monitor, so I'm pretty sensitive to things like frame rate drops. Initially, I suspected that the game was running at a much lower frame rate than I'd hoped. It felt like it was running around 40 FPS or lower, but I noticed that the frame rate seemed stable when standing still. Uh-oh. Then I tried plugging in a controller, and what do you know, the issue disappeared. Something was very wrong with the mouse input in my game, causing the frame rate to appear choppy. I engaged in an intense amount of Googling and scoured the discussions on Reddit. I found the best solution folks had come up with was to turn my mouse sensitivity down and the DPI on my mouse up. This helped a little, but did not nearly fix the issue. It's hard to show in video, but it felt like the mouse movement was running at a different frame rate than the rest of the game. Now, there's a certain level of jank in a game that I'm okay with. After all, I played Cyberpunk 2077 for nearly 100 hours. I'm no stranger to technical issues in otherwise great games. The sad fact is, though, that Dishonored 2 has been out for 4 years, and this issue has never been fixed. Going from Dishonored's impeccable performance to this feels like getting hit by a truck. Now, I've not tried the game on consoles, but from what I've heard, the performance there is much more stable. I have to imagine, much as it pains me to admit, that the source of all these troubles is the Void engine itself. Arkane really should have thought twice about creating their own engine. Obviously, I wasn't there for the development of the game. I understand that there were likely very good reasons for making this choice. However, in the end, I feel like the Void engine has created just as many problems as it has solved. With all that said, the game is hardly ruined. Dishonored 2 is still very much playable, and oh, what a treat it is to play. But before we get into that, there's a few more aspects of the presentation I want to touch upon. Arkane made some exceptional audio choices that embolden the quality of the presentation. The sound team put great thought and care into the ambience of each location. The city feels alive with gusts of wind, the clattering of machinery, and the slow whir of the windmills. Arkane also chose to cast celebrity voice actors for the majority of the main characters in the game. There are some big names here too. Rosario Dawson plays the cool and mysterious Megan Foster. Vincent D'Onofrio plays the secondary antagonist, Luca Abel, with his trademark gravel. I do wonder if using big-name actors was done to lend Dishonored 2 greater credibility as a dramatic work. If so, I feel the results are mixed. I just can't shake the feeling that the voice coming from the loudspeakers is not Luca Abel, but Wilson Fisk. It's hard to separate Sam Rockwell's voice from one of my favorite film characters, Billy Bickle. The strangest example is the choice to replace The Outsider's voice actor with Robin Lord Taylor. Again, his voice acting is more than fine, but he lends The Outsider a more sinister tone. The Outsider, to my mind, should seem a bit vulnerable and afraid. He is a god, yes, but not by choice. With that said, I do think he captures this a little better in the following expansion. And finally, we can talk about the game's exceptional score. Once again, Daniel Licht composes a tense and atmospheric soundtrack full of ambience. The instruments and riffs evoke all the right moods and textures of a coastal city. While the soundtrack of the first game was great, this one represents Licht at the top of his game. I'd like to play a few standout tracks for you. Besides the game's ambient music and battle themes, Arkane went the extra mile to give Karnaca a sense of place. Co-pilot Music and Sound returned to compose a set of diegetic folk songs that are equal parts catchy and atmospheric. Seriously, these songs are goddamn earworms. Again, I'd like to play a few examples, but I encourage you to go listen to all these tracks on your own time.
What is it to you? A feast or a famine, a nail or a screw, a dew from the south, a fire which is brew. A coup, what is it to you? Oh, brother, been 63 days. The water's been choppy, the whaler she sways. Can't keep no food down, can't find no sleep, 'cause the night is too dark and the water's too deep. 'Twas summer I boarded this old wooden ship. Sun, she was shining on Coletto's dock slip. But now it's all storms way out on cold seas, and if I don't drown, then surely I'll freeze. Wind blow us over this inky black wave. Brother, protect me from a watery grave. A watery grave.
Like the first game, the true quality of Dishonored 2 is in the strength of its mechanics. As an immersive sim, the tools at a player's disposal are what make or break the game. Happily, this is one area in which Dishonored 2 excels. The addition of the second player character doubles the number of available powers, though the player must choose one set or the other on their first playthrough. There are also upgrade trees for each power that open up useful and interesting new options. Even Corvo's powers have new upgrades that help him feel fresh coming from the first game. Emily's powers are all themed around the Lovecraftian void in a more obvious way than Corvo's. Her movement ability, Far Reach, has her use a shadowy black tentacle like a grappling hook. Mesmerize and Doppelganger both summon spectral phantasms for the purposes of distraction. The first alerts enemies and moves them away from the player, while the second occupies their attention and wipes their memories. Shadow Walk turns Emily into a dark creature with enhanced stealth and deadly claws. Dark Vision also makes a return, though with significant reductions in range and power. This is a welcome nerf, as Dark Vision became a little too powerful too early in the first game. Domino is by far the most satisfying and useful of Emily's new powers. It allows her to link enemies together, intertwining their fates. Knocking out 4 guards with 1 sleep dart never gets old. Emily's powers are mainly focused on misdirection, so they make a great choice for a player like me who is interested in the non-lethal stealth playthrough. Mesmerize and Domino alone are enough to breeze through many encounters in the game. In this way, it does seem to me that Emily's tools were more purpose-built for low chaos playthrough than Corvo's. Some of Corvo's powers are near useless on a stealth playthrough. Meanwhile, I found a use for every single ability in Emily's repertoire on my Ghost run. I think this represents an attempt to satisfy all players, and it succeeds. It would have been easy to push one character's toolset toward a sort of middle ground, but Arkane wisely presents 2 protagonists with unique strengths. Corvo is there for the player who wants to kill and sow chaos, while Emily is the more subtle and forgiving hand. It's no coincidence that Corvo's portrayal in this game is as much inspired by Batman as his younger self. The people fear Corvo, but they aren't quite so sure how they feel about Empress Emily. Of course, one can still play Emily on high chaos, and they can still play Corvo on low. The game accommodates all playstyles in an even broader sense than the first. For example, Corvo's powers are delicately changed to give them greater flexibility. Bend time, for example, now allows the player to advance time at their leisure. These new additions broaden the scope of possibility and further encourage repeat playthroughs. Arkane has also enriched the non-lethal playstyle with powerful new options. The player can now drop attack or parry into a non-lethal takedown. This broadens the range of choices from kill or don't kill to also include quietly or loud. The lethal playstyle is far more brutal in this game too. Executing an enemy in combat now results in brutal stabbings and decapitations. Guards will even start to flee if you kill too many of their companions. Dishonored used the chaos system to make the player feel guilty through narrative. In Dishonored 2, the very combat itself makes you feel guilty for the level of violence on display. The repertoire of non-lethal gadgets is expanded too. New items like howling and stinging bolts open up new options in stealth and combat. Stun mines make a triumphant return and are great fun to use. Each character has unique upgrade trees for their weapons too. Numerous new options expand the possibilities for each tool in the player's arsenal. Masterwork upgrades allow the player to fundamentally alter their weapon's function. For instance, an upgrade for Corvo's crossbow allows it to lock onto targets. Or, Emily can unlock a burst fire mode for her pistol to deal exceptional damage. There's also a fully fledged crafting system for bone charms now too. Players can break down bone charms to combine their effects on new, more efficient ones. Combining too many effects risks corrupting the bone charm, adding an additional negative quality. The new black bone charms also carry extremely powerful effects that cannot be reused. Combining these allows the player to come up with some freakishly overpowered builds. All these new options encourage repeat playthroughs, inspiring players to try new approaches. Thankfully, Arkane made the excellent choice to include several new Game Plus modes. Players can replay the game with all their unlocks and access to the powers of both protagonists. Furthermore, the player can revisit any mission with custom difficulty modifiers. Dishonored 2 finally allows for the endgame power trip that I so desired in the first game. All this represents an effort by Arkane to address every criticism leveled at the first game. Indeed, they succeed with flying colors on the gameplay front. However, I do of course still have a few criticisms. For one, the movement system feels far less fluid and dynamic than the first games. This is hardly helped by the chugging frame rate issues I covered earlier. Where in the first game Corvo felt bouncy and light on his feet, the player now feels heavy and weighty. This seems like an attempt to pivot toward realism, but I vastly prefer the more gamey movement of the first. There are also many smaller issues in gameplay that were not present in the first game. For example, the player sometimes cannot crouch through openings meant for traversal. This is no more than a momentary frustration, but I have yet to find a solution besides blinking to the other side. For those doing a no powers run, I imagine this is far more irritating. These issues, combined with the poor performance, leave Dishonored 2 feeling unfinished. I hope I'm not alone in feeling this way. As much as I love this game, its mechanics simply do not have the mirror shine polish of the first. There's still a lot to love in Dishonored 2, and I absolutely recommend it on the basis of its mechanics alone. However, the true strength of this sequel lies in its incredible level design. In the next section, I am once again going to analyze each of the game's missions in detail. Major spoilers will follow, so proceed at your own discretion. After Megan drops us off in Karnaca, we are set free to explore the city in relative safety. Our goal is to infiltrate the Addermeyer Institute and find the identity of the Crown Killer. There's a great deal to explore here in Karnaca. We find the game's first black market. These serve as a combination of Pierrot's shop and the favors system from the first game. We can buy permanent upgrades, as well as hints or items to help us within the mission. We see the first of the bloodfly infestations, which serve as environmental obstacles. The rats in the first game were aggressive and would chase the player. By contrast, bloodflies don't react unless we disturb their nest. This makes them more of a hazard than an enemy, and they can be easily dispatched with a flaming bolt or grenade. The visual design of these creatures is wonderful. They don't look like any real insect, appearing more otherworldly and alien. The body horror of the infested corpses is downright disturbing, too. There's a generous helping of side content to pursue in this first hub area. A local named Mindy asks us to recover a corpse from the local overseer office. In exchange, she can disable the electric rails leading to the Addermeyer Institute. The overseer's offices are beautiful, and the environmental objects provide much insight into their religion. They give off a sort of Church of Scientology vibe. As a side note, I adore the overseer's verbose and flowery dialogue.
We will burn a bright fire with our virtuous actions, so the others will not lose their way.
We can rob a local safe store, hunt down the various runes and bone charms, and listen to some local music. All these smaller moments and areas add so much texture and substance to the city of Karnaca. Arkane does a terrific job in making it worth your time to explore all the city's little nooks and crannies. One can spend hours in this first area alone, finding all the collectibles and lore. When we're ready, we infiltrate the railcar station and head to Addermeyer. Despite being a drab and gray place, the Addermeyer Institute still looks gorgeous. The deep blue of the sky and sea provide a wonderful sense of contrast to the gray building. There's a depth to the lighting, too, that was just not present in the original game's dreary environments. The Institute is mostly uninhabited, and quite open for a mission so early in the game. It's a breath of fresh air compared to the more constrained paths of the first game's opening hours. We can go in the front door, find our way around the back, go in through the roof, or find an open window. The lack of an overwhelming guard presence provides a safe environment for experimentation. Players can test out various strategies without much fear of failure. After exploring the desolate wreck for a while, we meet Dr. Hypatia. She has issues with her memory, and a nearby patient explains that a serum she created has been driving her mad. A nearby audio log reveals that Hypatia is herself the Crown Killer. The player can kill her or go on a more circuitous route to find the antidote. Taking the non-lethal approach restores her mild-mannered personality, and gains us an ally. This solution genuinely leaves everyone better off. This is a notable departure from the first game's cruelly ironic non-lethal solutions. Speaking for myself, the change is more than welcome. The other solutions in this game follow a similar theme. Gone are the sometimes creepy and brutal punishments of Dishonored. This time, there's always a better way. We learn that rival inventor Kiran Jindosh has been keeping Sokolov captive. We travel to the Aventa district, where Jindosh has built his sizable manor. Yes, this is the much ballyhooed Clockwork Mansion. But before we get to that, we have another generous hub area to explore. The Aventa district has two vertically arranged areas linked by a railcar system. The first of these areas has us breaking through a wall of light to the railcar station. We can also visit a black market shop and encounter the enigmatic Paolo. Once we've finished exploring Lower Aventa, we can head to the upper half of the district. This has a more funnel-like level design than is typical for the series. There's a single wall of light blocking the entrance to the manor, and myriad ways to disable it. Doing so gets us to the second railcar station, and into the mansion itself. Once inside, we are treated to a visual feast as the walls and floors of this Victorian interior shift around us. Gears and pulleys rearrange the room in a kaleidoscopic effect. This mission is rightly praised for its unique mechanical and artistic twist. The Clockwork Mansion allows players to change its very layout on the fly. None of these interactions are particularly complicated, but they do look spectacular. Players can even explore the machinery behind the walls. If the player avoids ever stepping on the mansion's pressure-sensitive floors, Jindosh will never know they were there at all. This is also the first mission in which we face the powerful clockwork soldiers. Unlike regular enemies, stealth attacks do not instantly kill them. To avoid detection, the player must drop attack the clockwork twice. The first attack removes their optics, blinding them but leaving their hearing intact. The second attack kills them. Players can also use stun mines to instantly kill these enemies. In direct combat, they are intimidating and brutal. On the higher difficulties, facing them in one-on-one combat is near suicidal. Dishonored 2 needed a fresh new enemy to liven up the gameplay, and Arkane delivered with style. The harmony of cold metal clockwork and warm wooden limbs is gorgeous. Players can even find the original ceramic-looking clockworks from the reveal trailer. These were some sort of prototype for the final bird-like design. Personally, I love them both, but the skeletal bird look is far more intimidating. Besides this level's unique mechanical twist, it also combines two mission types. We must first eliminate Jindosh, and then rescue Sokolov. Getting to Jindosh is something of a boss fight in itself. The level is one massive puzzle box for the player to solve. Jindosh himself hides in his lab with two clockworks standing watch. Dealing with these enemies undetected is a real challenge in the open circular space. Jindosh and the clockworks have a great view of the entire room, so avoiding their gaze is tricky indeed. If we manage to knock Jindosh unconscious, we can discover a means to turn his technology against him. We place Jindosh in an electroshock machine of his own making and turn it on. The machine robs him of the thing he loves most, his own intellect. Now, I certainly think this outcome is kinder than killing him, but there's a lot of horror in the act. You can hear the abject despair in Jindosh's voice as he realizes he can no longer remember his own work. Is it a preferable outcome? Yes. Is it a merciful outcome? Not quite. Still, the man was planning to build a robot army to help subjugate the Empire, so I suppose he gets his comeuppance. With Jindosh dealt with, we must now complete the extraction phase of the mission. Sokolov is in the basement, imprisoned in a kind of puzzle box of his own. Inside, there is a single clockwork soldier and a series of pressure plates that raise and lower the walls. Dispatching the machine requires clever use of our powers and the pressure plates. Sokolov greets us with a gentle smile, overjoyed to see Emily, or Corvo, after so long. Unfortunately, the old man falls unconscious shortly after. Maybe this is some kind of weird custom in the Isles, as Lizzie did the same thing in the last game. Our protagonist must then carry Sokolov all the way back to Megan's skiff. I really love these backtracking sections in these games. They illustrate to the player just how quickly they could have moved through the level the first time. Arkane packs an immense amount of detail and content into just a few city blocks. That night, Delilah pulls us into the void for some exposition. She reveals that she was a bastard child of the Emperor, and shunned as a political inconvenience. According to her, Jessamine was responsible for her ultimate exile from the family. What's more damning is that Jessamine herself doesn't deny it in the slightest. When we wake up, we speak with Sokolov. He reveals that Jindosh was often visited by Brianna Ashworth, curator of the Royal Conservatory. She is a member of Delilah's inner circle, building some magical device called an oraculum. Our next mission sees us traveling to the conservatory to pay her a little visit. The conservatory is a meticulously crafted level, but it feels a bit underwhelming after the breathtaking Clockwork Mansion. Where that mission was bold and new, this level refines the design priorities of the first game. We begin in the city streets outside the main interior space, free to explore and choose our point of entry. There is a certain elegance in this simplicity. This level brings back the witch enemies from Dishonored's DLC. If you'll recall, I praised the way these enemies spice up the gameplay in later missions. The witches now have color-coded variants that use unique abilities in combat too. With that said, stealthy players are unlikely to even notice this new enemy variety. I'm willing to bet it might even be news to some veteran players that the witch's appearance telegraphs which powers they will use. It certainly was to me during my High Chaos run. The Gravehounds also make a triumphant return, adding even more enemy variety. What shocks me is that these enemies are rarely used again until the very end of the game. I love the tension of not knowing if a witch will teleport behind you or if a Gravehound will spot you and pounce. It's unpredictable, but it never feels like the game is cheating you. I do wish there were more witch-themed levels to make further use of these enemies, although it's not as though the game is lacking for content. After some exploration, we discover Ashworth's master plan. Her oraculum would allow her to spy on and alter the prophecies of the Overseer's oracular order. In her offices, we can find broken lenses and swap them into the machine. In a similar twist of fate to Kieran Jindosh, the broken device robs her of her powers. She loses the thing she loves the most: control. We also learn that Ashworth organized the seance that brought Delilah back from the dead, so we must head to the place where all this began, the Dust District. We must infiltrate the fortified manor of Aramis Stilton, He is the wealthy owner of Karnaka's silver mines, and it seems he hosted the long-ago seance at his estate. Unfortunately, Kiran Jindosh himself designed a complicated puzzle lock to seal the entrance. We can try to find the combination ourselves or puzzle it out with pencil and paper. More easily though, we can win over one of two factions, the Howlers or the Overseers. The charismatic Paolo leads the Howler gang, and he wants the local Overseers gone. He tasks us with eliminating the local Vice Overseer Liam Byrne. Paolo doesn't much care if we bring him in alive or dead. One way or the other, the Overseers are getting hurt. Alternatively, we can go to Vice Overseer Byrne and work with him to take down the Howler gang. He wants Paolo dead or so far away that he'll never come back. Trouble is, Paolo has recovered the hand of Granny Rags. When he dies, he uses it to turn into a swarm of rats and return to his hideout. So we have to kill him twice in the same day to be rid of him permanently. As you can imagine, this is quite the challenge to do quietly. Of course, we can also try to decipher the Jindosh lock ourselves. The game generates the solution randomly each time, so the player can't default to using a guide. If we want to crack the code, we have to do it the old-fashioned way. I'll be the first to admit I didn't even attempt to open the lock with my wits alone. I'm sure it's solvable, but unfortunately I just don't have the patience. Still, I'm glad the option is there for those who want to test their minds with a difficult brain teaser. These kinds of puzzles are rare indeed, relics of the Mist era. The Dust District, true to its name, is also buffeted by dust storms every few minutes. These blind enemies and mask sound, allowing the player to take out enemies completely undetected. My hope is that future games will incorporate more of this environmental interaction. We can also find Corvo's old home here in the Dust District. We gain valuable insight into his past. In his youth, Corvo impressed the nobility in a sword tournament called the Blade for Bana. After this, he joined the Grand Guard and proved himself to his superiors. So great was Corvo's reputation that the Duke sent him as a diplomatic gift to Emperor Kaldwin. And well, we all know how the story goes from there. Once we break through the Jindosh lock, we make our way into Aramis Stilton's mansion. This mission, called A Crack in the Slab, is my favorite by far. In fact, it may be my favorite single mission in any video game, though that might be hyperbole. We'll see if I change my mind in a future video. When we enter the manor grounds, the magic there sucks our powers away for the duration of the mission. We head inside and find Stilton locked in his piano room. Whatever he saw all those years ago drove him to madness. The outsider appears to us and grants us a unique item for use in this mission, the timepiece. This item allows us to travel 4 years back in time when the mansion was beautiful and alive. Guards patrol the manor, watching and waiting for any interference. In the dark and dismal present, hounds and bloodfly keepers stalk the hallways in search of a meal. The timepiece not only allows us to look into the past, but change it. Changes we make in the past will affect the level in the present. This mechanic opens up a multitude of new level design options. Arkane delivers and presents many clever surprises. For instance, if the player knocks out these window repairmen in the past, the window is gone in the present. Or the player could use the timepiece to take out a guard in plain sight, traveling back to the present as the body falls. This is a concept rich with potential, and I feel Arkane only scratched the surface of what is possible. An entire game's worth of level design possibilities live in this core idea. Once again, Arkane presents inspiration for other studios to build off of. What's fascinating is that Titanfall 2 released only a month prior with a similar mission. The player traveled back and forth in time, making changes in the past and affecting the present. It worked just as well in a high-stress action game as in this careful immersive sim. My favorite moment is when the player has to quickly flip back and forth in time during an exhilarating fall. I do think Arkane could have done something more demanding like this in Dishonored 2. Still, the timepiece is quite nice as a get-out-of-jail-free card when the player gets spotted. The unique mechanical twist is not the only notable thing about this mission either. The level geometry takes on a new meaning when the player must examine it for potential points of change. The designers reward attentive players with runes and bone charms. A player might notice that a corpse caused a bloodfly infestation blocking a door, or that a guard deposits a valuable trinket in a hidden alcove. The joy of using this power means that the mission stays exciting on every playthrough. It never gets old to find all the little ways you can use time travel to your advantage, even without your powers. Arkane, never being ones to leave a concept half-baked, also crafted several possible futures for the manor. When we find Aramis Stilton, we have several options that can alter our present. We can pickpocket Stilton's door combination, which lets us spy on the seance, but this option leaves him a paranoid wreck in the present. So we can kill him, but this leaves the manor completely abandoned. We can knock him unconscious, sparing his sanity and leaving him alive and well. Saving Stilton restores his manor in the present to its former beauty. There are even some extra runes and bone charms hidden behind new renovations. These changes also alter the fate of the Dust District. Stilton is a good man, for a noble. He is kinder to his workers and more conscious of the environment. The Dust District is cleaner and its people happier. Stilton has kept the Duke's cruelty at bay, at least in his little piece of Karnaca. However, if we fail to save Stilton, the Dust District remains as dismal as ever. When we leave, the outsider pulls us into the void once more and explains his backstory to us. He was once an ordinary young man, captured and made a god by some ancient ritual. Delilah found the place in the void where this ritual happened and stole its power. This gave her some level of control over the outsider. So, he has just as much of a stake in this as we do. In spite of his aloof and darkly curious persona, he genuinely does care what happens this time around. We head back to the Dreadful Whale and prepare for the last of our missions in Karnaca. The time has finally come to head to the palace and eliminate Duke Abel. At Stilton's Manor, we learned that Delilah's soul was hidden in a phylactery. If we can capture her spirit and return it to her body, we can make her mortal once again. As before, we have to traverse the city district outside the palace first. This is the shortest of the game's hub areas, and with good reason. Arkane wisely did not let the city sections overstay their welcome so close to the end. The design of the palace itself is nothing short of brilliant, and I don't just mean the gameplay. This is the first truly modern architecture we've seen in the Empire of the Isles. Duke Abel sees himself as a man of the future. The imposing and elegant modernist architecture reflects his character. Even the materials are new and exciting. White concrete and reddish wood combine to create a striking visual contrast. It's a great evolution of style here at the end of our time in Karnaca. The building's gently sloping curves provide a great deal of open space to explore. However, they also leave the player more exposed than dense cityscape. The architecture alone increases the challenge of stealth while maintaining stylistic cohesion. Once again, Arkane demonstrates their aptitude for crafting believable game spaces. The non-lethal resolution in this mission is my favorite in the game, too. Duke Abel uses a body double for public appearances. The player can speak with the double and have him claim that he is the real Duke. The double can then act in Abel's place while carrying out Emily's will. It is delightful to see Duke Abel made the victim of his own brand of gaslighting and manipulation. Barrister Timsh's fate in Knife of Dunwall was similarly satisfying. With Abel eliminated, we can steal the key to his vault and capture Delilah's spirit. The protagonist only has one item in their possession that can hold a spirit: the heart. Unfortunately, it cannot hold two souls at once. Jessamine bids farewell to her loved one. Once again, this scene feels too cold and emotionless for the character's last goodbye. I know it might seem repetitive to bring this up again, but I just don't understand how this happened. This kind of scene writes itself. Maybe there's something I'm missing, but this is a running problem throughout much of Dishonored 2's writing. The character work is flat, and it does a disservice to the incredible world they've built. It's a damn shame. With a little more confidence, this story could have been far more emotional than the first. Remember, we didn't even find out that Corvo was Emily's father until near the climax of the first game. The script and voice acting alone was enough to sell us on the character's relationship. Instead, Dishonored 2 relegates these emotional beats to diary entries. I hope I'm not alone in thinking that this story could have been so much greater than it is, but more on that in a few minutes. For now, let's get back to the task at hand, getting Delilah off the throne. After so long away from home, we finally return to Dunwall. After all Karnaca's beautiful sights, Dunwall looks bleaker than ever, especially after Delilah's coup. People have all but abandoned the city streets. Looters have scoured the boarded-up shops. Wolfhounds have overrun the streets. Witches lurk on the rooftops, singing dark hymns over loudspeakers. Megan finally reveals her deepest secret here at the end of our time with her. Her true name is Billy Lurk. She was one of Dowd's assassins. She helped kill Jessamine. Reflecting the end of Knife of Dunwall, we can choose to forgive or condemn her. Either way, she sets off back to Karnaca to find her old master. That sounds like it would make for a cool story. After battling or sneaking our way through the streets, we reach Dunwall Tower. The architecture feels accurate to the first game, but features new areas to explore. It feels like coming home. Our experience reflects our character's experience. We feel nostalgia for the first game while our protagonist reflects on better times. Delilah's spirit taunts us from within the heart for the duration of the mission. As though it wasn't enough to steal the throne, she has to insult us personally. Arkane really wants you to hate Delilah by this point, but to be honest, I didn't. She's been something of an absentee villain. Dishonored's twist was strong because we had time to get to know Havelock, so his betrayal had weight. His abduction of Emily only ratcheted up the stakes. We felt a genuine sense of vengeance toward him. In this game, Delilah rarely appears after her coup. The player might have forgotten why they were supposed to hate her by this point. It robs the final mission of much of its tension. When we reach the throne room, we use the heart to return Delilah's spirit, making her mortal once again. Taking the non-lethal approach requires us to craft a corrupt bone charm and place it on the throne. Then we head into Delilah's painted world for the final showdown. This painting is far less vivid and colorful than the one visited in Bring More Witches. It feels like a missed opportunity to create something expressive and vibrant. I am sure the artists could have crafted something spectacular with this new engine. Regardless, we face Delilah, fighting her doppelgangers or sneaking up behind her. We can kill her or place her unconscious body on the cursed throne, trapping her in her own painting. Let's hope no one else has any seances anytime soon. Now we've reached the end of Dishonored 2, and we must make our final choice. Do we free our frozen loved one or take the throne and rule alone? Personally, I can't see either character leaving their closest loved one trapped in stone, but maybe you played your Corvo or Emily as a deranged killer. Who am I to judge? This time around, Arkane has opted to use Fallout-style ending slides to wrap things up. Like the first game, we see the results of our final decision and the overall level of chaos. We're also shown the resolutions of the individual character arcs we influenced. As such, it would be considerably more time-consuming to go through each ending as I did in the last video. Instead, I'll simply say that I prefer this more nuanced approach. Granular ending slides make for a far more satisfying conclusion than a good or evil ending. However, that's not to say that I enjoyed the ending of Dishonored 2. Not really. None of these endings carry the same emotional weight for me as the conclusion of the first game. The stakes are by all accounts even higher this time around, and yet I couldn't bring myself to care what happened to Emily or Corvo by the end of this game. It's not just because of the absentee villain or flat character writing. No, this issue runs far deeper. I'm sorry for what I'm about to have to do. This is the part of the video where I'm going to have to get political. You see, this story positions us as a character that wields immense political power. Our protagonist is the Empress of the Isles, or otherwise her right-hand man. Where in the first game we were merely a cog in the great machine, we are now its very architects. I cannot discuss this narrative without also discussing its political themes. I avoided discussing too many of my own ethical views and political opinions in the first video, but this was always coming. Games are art, and art is by its nature political. Especially a game like Dishonored, which draws on themes of empathy and class conflict. On my last video, a commenter accused me of virtue signaling too much. Well, the signaling stops now, I suppose. I'm a leftist. Of course, this means that some of you will not like what I have to say. If you feel like this section might rub you the wrong way, that's fine, but I encourage you to try listening anyhow. You've already come this far. Even if you disagree, maybe some of my views will help you to think more deeply about your own. If not, the time code for the epilogue is in the description. So, with that particular disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about class. The original Dishonored used class conflict as a backdrop for its narrative. In that story, the rich and powerful were rightly blamed for their exploitation of the poor. The Lord Regent himself was responsible for the plague that devastated the city. While the wealthy were safe in their mansions and private estates, the workers died in droves. Quarantine did nothing for those that had to keep working to feed their families. The laborer did not have the luxury of riding out the plague. Does this sound at all familiar? Corvo, our character, was a part of the upper class at the start of the first game. However, he was soon betrayed and condemned to die. He learned the hard way that those around him had not earned their place by the quality of their character. What followed was a series of bloody murders or ironic punishments for the upper class. By the climax of the story, Corvo finds himself betrayed yet again. He sees what becomes of good men given absolute authority. The ending, of course, positioned Emily as the Empress of the Isles, but the game was not particular about what the future would hold for the people of the Empire. One could imagine, of course, that Emily would right these wrongs. Perhaps, given absolute power, she would have dissolved the nobility. She might have given the working class the right to vote. We can imagine a better future for the people of the Empire. Dishonored 2, unfortunately, does not picture such a bright future. Emily has not changed a thing. We begin the game as either a complacent ruler or her vigilante bodyguard. That's all fine and dandy, it's perfectly acceptable to start from a kind of darkest timeline outcome of the first game's ending. But the game then fails to criticize our protagonists for their abuses of power. Emily and Corvo are both complicit in the system that let men like Duke Abel exploit the working class. The writers do not hold them accountable for this. They do take pains to show us that Emily and Corvo have been ignoring the plight of the poor. Duke Abel was operating right under their noses, and they let him get away with it. You see, people like Luca Abel are not just bad actors taking advantage of the system, they are a direct product of the system. It would be a great storytelling device to have our characters realize this, but they never do. To be clear, this is not a fantasy. Capitalism by its nature necessitates the exploitation of the oppressed. It is in the material interest of those with wealth to give as little as possible to the workers that generate it. Systemic issues like racism and sexism mean that some folks are just never given a fair chance. Men like Duke of Bell, men like the Lord Regent, they are very real indeed. By the end of Dishonored 2, Emily and Corvo have seen the flaws in their system. They have spent weeks among the people of Karnaca and seen their plight. If you think I'm pulling these themes of class conflict out of nowhere, look closer. The writing is quite literally on the wall. So, how is it after all these revelations that we end up right back where we began? Our protagonist has seen firsthand the violence and injustice inherent in this system, and yet the good ending sees our heroes take absolute power over it once again. They should know by now that this will not change anything, but this is presented as a victory. Arkane has refused to confront their own themes. The frustration here is not simply that the game did bad politics, it is that the game actively undermines its own themes by ending on this uncritical note. The systems of power and oppression remain unchanged. People like Luca Abel and yes, Emily Caldwin will continue to exploit the working class. But there's another story here, and you can see that someone wanted to tell it. Everywhere in this game there are allusions to class conflict and revolutionary ideology. These powerful themes could have been the focus of the narrative. We could have seen our heroes lead an effort to dramatically change the Empire for the better. Instead, Arkane wrote an uncontroversial story where nothing meaningfully changes. This issue is hardly unique to this game, or to Arkane Studios. In fact, we're going to see them tackle the same themes with quite a bit more deftness in their next outing. So I don't want to come across as though I'm canceling Arkane or anything so dramatic as that. Many AAA studios try desperately to say nothing about anything. At least someone at Arkane tried to say something. It's a damn shame they didn't get to say it louder. Hopefully Arkane can use these themes in the next game, and I sincerely hope they do. There's a lot of potential in the Corvo and Emily as the villains angle, that might be where the series is headed, but there's also a lot of potential in moving on from these characters. We could explore the Pandician continent and see firsthand the results of the Empire's colonial project, or we could break out of the vast forced labor camps of Tivia and liberate them. This world is rich with stories of the oppressed overcoming their oppressors. I hope those stories are the ones that get told in the future. My unsolicited advice for Arkane is this. Stop hedging your bets on this stuff. You have a powerful story waiting to be told here. Telling it might genuinely change some people's minds and inspire real good. I know that your games certainly inspired me.
Careful. There's always a price to pay. What you decide will ripple across the years.
Let me be clear about one thing. Dishonored 2 is an incredible game. I've spent much of this video pointing to its flaws, but do not mistake this criticism for an indictment of the game. In point of fact, Dishonored 2 still has my glowing recommendation. Dishonored 2 does so much right that I could never call it a bad or even mediocre game. It is a brilliantly designed immersive sim with inspired art direction and world building. It has some of the greatest original music ever put into a video game soundtrack. The repertoire of gadgets, abilities, and supernatural powers is massive. Dishonored 2 outshines its predecessor with its variety of stealth and combat options. Lethal and non-lethal players alike will find much to enjoy in this sequel. However, this game is not one of the greatest games that I have ever played. It is not, as the first game was, an all-time classic. Technical issues rob the gameplay of its satisfying smoothness. The narrative is flatly delivered in spite of a talented cast. Questionable design decisions hold this game back from real greatness. This is the burden of sequels. It is not enough to be just as good as the first. Dishonored 2 had to be better. But at least Dishonored 2 is just as good as the first. It does enough right that it breaks about even in terms of quality, and that's alright for a fan of the series like myself, but it was not enough to secure it a place among the all-timers. I still love this game to pieces. I've replayed it many times, and I will continue to do so in the future. However, it is not with quite the same fondness and admiration that I have for the original. Karnaca is a great place to visit, but home is where the heart is, and my heart is still in Dunwall.
Oh, brother, been 63 days. The water's been choppy, the whale she sways. Can't keep no food down, can't find no sleep, 'cause the night is too dark and the water's too deep. 'Twas summer, I boarded this old wooden ship, Sun, she was shining on Calero's docks.
Hello again, and thanks so much for watching this video. I know this video took a long time to come out compared to when I said it would, and I do apologize for that. I had hoped to have it out quite a bit sooner, but I moved and started a new job since the last video came out, so there's quite a bit going on in my life, and I didn't have quite as much time for making videos as I would have liked to compared to before, so thank you for your patience. All the comments that I've been seeing recently have been very heartening and very humbling to me. It really means a lot to see that so many people have enjoyed what I've made, and you know, to see the nice things that you've said, and I hope you guys know that it really does actually mean something to creators to see that kind of thing, so thank you again. The next few videos will be about Dishonored, Death of the Outsider, and Prey. I believe I mentioned that in the first video. And I think I'm going to change the order of the next two videos. I initially said I would do them in release order and cover Prey and then Death of the Outsider last, but I actually think it might be better to finish up with the Dishonored series first, even though it's not chronologically how they were released, and then move on to Prey as a kind of series finale until Deathloop comes out. And now I am hoping to have that last video out in time for Deathloop, so that I've kind of got a nice backlog, and I can, you know, use those other videos as a springboard to then hopefully analyze Deathloop as a next part in the Arkane lore series. So that should be interesting. In terms of future projects, I have been planning some, and I haven't really moved much further in the planning stages just because I want to finish these videos first. But the one I have the most planning done on is a video concerning the game Control and its literary influences in the new weird genre. So I've begun putting together some early notes for that. I've played the game twice already. I've read the Area X trilogy, the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer, and I've just bought the book House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski to research as well for that video. But that one will not be for quite some time. And then future projects after that, I'm not quite so sure. That'll kind of depend on what people want and what I want to do when the time does come. Probably not going to be for a while though, so I'll worry about finishing this little series first. To wrap up, I'll just say again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll do a little plug at the end here. You know, it's my video. I can say as I please. I have a Patreon. If you want to donate, it would be greatly appreciated. It would help me get, you know, better recording equipment, that kind of thing. And you absolutely should not donate unless you have the means to. You know, if you're a student, if you're you know, heavy in debt or anything like that, don't make Patreon your first priority. Not for me or for anyone else for that matter. But if you do have the means and the wherewithal, I would appreciate the support, and it really does mean a lot. The people who have already supported me on there, you know, again, it doesn't go unnoticed. So thank you so much. I hope to see you sooner next time. Thanks for watching.